Okay, I think we are live. Yes, we are live.
Perfect.
So whenever you're ready, Carl, I think we're ready to go.
Excellent. Very good. So we will now have listened to the music. Um, Hello, everyone, and welcome to quite a different setup this evening. As you can see, it's me, Carl Abrahamsson, talking, and not Rudolf yet. I have not hijacked the program or the this evening. I have been invited to host this and to interview Rudolf after all his wonderful hard labor with the podcast with Thoth Hermes. And I'd like to say first also that we were just listening to Edward Eljar Nimrod from the Enigma Variations conducted by Leonard Bernstein. And there's so much to talk about. You have created this academy of sorts for a long time now, and so many episodes, all very substantial with interesting people. So it's absolutely fair that the focus should be on you this evening. And I think that logically, and it's always a good starting point to start at the very beginning. And I wonder where you got the idea from to actually start the podcast.
Well, first, thank you, Carl, for having accepted to be the host today for this episode. And yes, well, some people have no, quite a few people have asked me to talk about me one day, and I have hesitated for 5.5 years because that's when it all started. But it started, as you just said, it started rather 3 or 4 years before actually the first episode, because I don't know, I got more and more interested into the world of the Western esoteric tradition. I have been interested and active in that for, well, I'm 62 now, for almost 40 years. I'm not one of those who started in kindergarten, but in my early 20s. And at some point, well, of course, then podcasts did not exist back then, and it was a completely different world 40 years ago. But then the first podcast I listened to in that field was actually Occult of Personality, Greg Kaminsky. And we all know Greg's podcast, I guess, and it's a great show. And he is a wonderful person, and he did that for, still does it for, I think, now 15 years.
Yeah.
Another one was um, Carol Poke Runyon, who is also a veteran of the podcast. I don't think many people know that. He has been doing that. I don't think he does it anymore, but he has done his podcast on the same topics also for ages. And I was often at night, I went to bed, I put my headphones in and I listened to those. And at some point I said, this is all very North American and it's great. I'd like to do a European perspective. Actually, that was the initial idea. And but it took me time, of course. I had to learn about podcasting. Then I opened a Facebook page about a year and a half before the first episode because I needed to find also the audience. I mean, I knew nobody basically except for 5 or 6 people around myself. And actually, that created quite a nice community. I'm very proud of that community. And at some point, Greg, I can say that because he said it very clearly back then, about 6.5, 7 years ago, he fell rather ill. And he had some problems continuing the podcast because it was a workload that was too heavy at that time. And I contacted him and said, look, I'm planning to do my podcast as well, but I don't want to give you bad feelings. I say that right from the beginning. But if you need help, I'm happy to do the cutting. I will learn lots from you and do the cutting of the sound files, etc. And I started doing that. And after 3 or 4 shows, he said, "Well, why don't you be my co-host?" And so I started in the podcast world actively, so to speak, as Greg Kaminsky's co-host. And that was lovely, the experience and to learn from him, but also to just be with him. He's still a good friend, and we have regular contact. Yeah, and then at some point I felt, okay, I have to jump into the water. And that's what I did. And Alan Richardson, who I had not known at all, but I just picked him by looking around who could be the right person to start with. And he was the first. And in April 20th, I guess, 2017, I launched the Thoth Hermes podcast.
Yeah, no, that's an amazing 5 years. And I mean, it's interesting also with this kind of, well, it's journalism in a way, how quickly it accumulates and becomes a body in its own right, like a little library in a way. And I'm thinking, I've been trying to, find something similar. And of course, there are podcasts of an esoteric nature or that thematically talk about it, but not quite in the same way. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, now that you have 5 years down the line, what would you say that makes Thoth Hermes unique?
Okay, well, I can only say what I try to do that it makes it unique, and hope that that will also be resented like that on the other side. First of all, one thing that I wanted to make it unique from did not work, but I don't mind. But it did not become the European thing, because even though I have a lot of European guests like yourself, Carl, you were also twice on this show, and like many other European guests, that part has worked. I have a lot of European guests, but the audience is 85-90% North American, which I find very interesting. I mean, get me right, I'm very happy about that, but well, the UK is quite strong also, the Nordic countries also, but maybe the language barrier is still within Europe bigger than you would expect. So that's that side. But on the other side, what I try to do is a mix between well-known names from that field, also good old names like Dolores Ashcroft-Nowitzki. I mean, she is kind of doyenne of the field, and I was very, very happy and proud to have her. People like that, or Frater VD. I don't want to give too many names because other people will feel bad about it. There are so many good people I had here, but also to bring on, and that's something I've also done in my previous business all the time, to bring on people who I think are interesting, who are younger, who have not yet that community, and to bring them on, maybe not the first time, but in a very early stage, and make them a bit better known. And I think that works. I think you have to balance, because it's the well-known people who attract the audience, and then the audience sticks and listens also to when they don't know the name, and that's nice. That I really like that, and I see it in the figures. It works, and that makes me really happy.
Absolutely, and I mean it's very, very nice. And I'm thinking, are there any people sort of this older generation that you have wanted to have on, but that hasn't happened because they didn't want to, or simply because it hasn't happened yet? Are there those people that you would like to have on?
I'm sure there are still people who I have not had, because it was not enough time in 5.5 years. I did not do a weekly show in the beginning. That's only the last 2 years, basically. And so I'm not running out of names, never. And it makes me glad. But also, yeah, there have been a couple of refusals, but I must say a very, very few. Very, very few. And even from the beginning, I mean, I mentioned Dolores, but she came on in season 2 at a very early stage. So I wasn't the Thoth Hermes podcast that it is today, with anyway, people now know a bit about it, right? Or they can also, if they don't, they go and listen, have a choice of episodes to listen to make sure I'm doing my job well. But of course, it's always hard to drop names. I don't want to say who refused, because I don't want to give any bad feelings.
No.
And if I say names who I want on and others I don't, I'm as you say, this is a journalistic work, and you have to stay as neutral as possible. And I even tried in the interview if possible.
No, but it's great wealth of material has accumulated, and it's kind of an eclectic mix too, which I think is absolutely fantastic. And I think you're right in the sense that there will always be people to interview. It's not a problem, because
Absolutely.
young writers pop up, and there's some oldie that you might not have caught yet, but you will. So
or bring him back also, because people
that's
write
right.
a new book or have new
Yeah.
ideas. Absolutely.
But I think how do you orient yourself? How do you make the decisions? Is it because someone writes a new book and you see, oh, it's time to catch that person, or time to talk to that person again? Is it based on their work, or are you actively pursuing someone who might have been silent for a while?
Well, both, but I am, and once again, I'm not going to talk about my former profession that I did for 40 years, but I act in a bit in the similar way. I'm the hunter, and of course now, after some time, when people have started to know your show, I get also proposals, and I have a couple of publishing houses who also talk to me regularly, but I feel completely free also refusing those proposals. So I've never ever felt, and I'm grateful to those publishers also, because I've never felt a pressure. You have to take that person because I sent you the book or so. It's really people are very nice and very, very grateful also to work with, and but I do a lot of hunting. So I'm a lot on the web, or on bookstores, or also old books to find out about people, and I have, well, they're not all esoteric books, but I have 3,000 volumes at home, like all of us. I see your background
Yes.
there. We are all those book nerds, and of course that teaches you a lot about it. And of course I'm active myself in the field as well, not as a writer, but I mean as an active esotericist. And I'm interested myself in many of those topics. And when I read something special, and you always detect new interesting things. It's amazing. Even during the interview, sometimes you suddenly realize, hey, that person, we talk about this, but I wasn't aware that he or she is also so educated in or active in that other field. So it's really nice. It's each episode for me has become, sounds like a cliche, but I learn at each episode. It's fascinating to speak to those people, and I think I've even made some friends, and that's nice.
No, absolutely. And I think that's the difference in this sphere that we're in sort of, the online community, or whatever you want to call it, is that it's immediate, and it's very easy to build, networks and sort of synergetic effects. Whereas with books, it's much more laborious and takes time, of course. You can still have a
Absolutely.
good network, but this is so immediate. And I think that's why things that are great and intelligent and, well made can grow pretty quickly in a short period of time. There needs to be a buzz around it, but there won't be a buzz unless it's really good. So
Absolutely.
I think that's very, very interesting, and true in your case also. I wonder. You say you learn things, and everyone who spends time with Thoth Hermes and listens to the different episodes, of course, learn a lot, because the nature of the subject matter and what people are interested in is actually learning. It's sort of, you call it
Yes.
occult or esoteric, but it's still about actual things that can improve your life or make you go, oh, that's fantastic, in terms of epiphanies. And And I'm thinking about it. You have even used the word yourself in a different context, the academy. And I don't mean the academy in the academic sense, but as a
Yeah.
place where you collect learning simply. Was that something that was conscious in you from the very beginning?
No, no, I don't think so. I must say I'm very happy about that it developed in that sense. And well, hopefully also when I listen to my more recent interviews, I think it can be felt that I have more knowledge than I had 5.5 years ago, not only on how I interview people, but also how I approach those people and how we discuss things. So, but I'm happy you're saying that this can be felt, that this is, yes, we did an academy and you were part of that at some point, but that the whole project is a bit like a library. You said that word, and I like that, because when you go on the website and have 140 episodes there by now, roughly, and so many different approaches. You can talk about left-hand paths. You can see about the Golden Dawn. You can talk about Kabbalah or tarot or whatever, and you have really many different schools of people there. And I would like to come back to that word journalism that you said in the beginning, and I really like that because somehow to stay neutral and I do not have to be in agreement with everything that my guests say. I can't be because there are so many different opinions. I would be lying if I were. But it's the place for them to express themselves, and it's my part as an interviewer to dig and to make them say what is their true approach to things. I hope that can be felt, but that at least is the aim of what I want to achieve, and that I think then creates that possibility of learning for myself and hopefully also for the listeners.
Hmm. Absolutely. Most people are very used to the platform, meaning, podcasting and listen while you go or drive your car, and it's really good. But haven't you ever given thought to the fact that it could be great to actually turn these interviews into books?
Yes, I have been thinking of I've been thinking of that. For the moment, so far, I haven't had the time because transcribing, even if there is now software to do part of your job, but of course, the terminology that we use in our special occultist language is not in the software built in the software. But thank you for reminding me of that idea. I'm not sure if not it wasn't even you yourself who already said that to me a couple of years
Probably.
back, probably. But I have to think about it again. Yes. Well, I'm 62 now. I have 3 years to go before retirement. Maybe that's a job for retirement.
Yeah, and maybe the AI software will be better by then also.
Yes,
Who
exactly.
knows? Yeah. Yeah. No, but I think it's the same way. You build an academy of sorts in that sense, anthologizing material, and I think that could be very, very worthwhile because it's history writing and it's thematically poignant. If people are interested in this and that, you could organize that thematically with the
Yes.
issues. Um, so I'm curious what Rudolf does when he's not working on the podcast, when he's not online, if that happens sometime.
It does happen quite a lot, actually. Well, what do you want to know? Do you want to know now or what I did before?
I'm thinking more like now. What do you
Yes.
do to relax and just stay
Right.
off screen?
Well, when I'm off screen, either I'm at work at my day job, of course, which I might mention because it's nothing to do directly with this work, but it still has points where those things touch. I'm working as a funeral celebrant now I've been working for the last 5 years in that field, and so I'm a bit the Anubis of Vienna, and being the priest for those people who do not want a priest. So I always say it like that. So I'm trying to accompany funerals, but speech-wise, right? Speaking there. But apart from that, I'm of course myself also an active hermeticist, occultist. I'm practicing a lot. I have been for, well, next March it'll be 30 years that I have been a Freemason. But that was not even the very beginning of my occupation in the field. I started in the field with shamanism, actually, in the very early years, and then anthroposophy caught me, and at some point I became a Freemason. And already by saying that little listing of development, you see that I'm also very eclectic with myself, and not only in the podcast. And that gave a complete image for me. Hermeticism is for me the word that I would use, that I really practice a lot. I do an hour of ritual work and meditation every morning when I get up. I use also a lot of time reading, of course, in the field, but also developing rituals, translating them. And I'm more a solitary worker, to be honest, in that field. By necessity in the first place, because I don't know how it is in your area in Sweden, but I was surprised how little serious occultist groups are around here in my area, in around Vienna or that part of Europe. And I do not want to travel for hours to do that. That should be something you like to do, and not you have to do. And so, but in the end, I must say it's probably also my character. It comes quite well with my character. I'd rather I'm better at working myself, except or when you need a group. There are cases where you need a group, but I prefer mostly doing the occultist work as a solitary. By its nature, you don't speak about it too much in detail, because it's kind of like giving a spell away. So generally speaking, it is ceremonial, hermetic. Yes, that's, and of course my previous business, the theater, is playing a role. Maybe we can speak about that a bit later, because music and magic is for me something that goes very close together. And ceremonial magic and theater is of course something that is a bit related. So probably that's part of my personality.
Absolutely. I think it's a very interesting, it's not a dilemma, it's not a real dichotomy, but there is a kind of ambivalence in this relationship between occultism, which is a very complicated word, a phenomenon, and this contemporary time that we're in, where you've been doing this podcast for 5 years, and you have people talking about their personal practices, and perhaps revealing things, or at least being very frank and honest. So you have this desire in people who are occultists to talk about their occultism, but perhaps it should be occult. But we're living in a contemporary time where it's already the rabbit is out of the hat, or the cat is out of the box. So that creates a big change in, I would say, the contemporary psyche, in a way, where things become not stigmatized at all, but rather encouraged as mind expanding, or consciousness boosting, or all these things that can be marketed and sold in neat little packages. But it's still, I think, significant at this point, where we're in this problematic time in the evolution of the planet, that all these things pop up because they need to. I think it's part of a kind of survival instinct of the planet. And there, I think your podcast is a great resource in that sense, that you can find intelligent people talking about these very, very fascinating but often quite complex subjects and areas, and I think that's a very good thing.
Yes, and that's why I also, well, you opened many doors for me here, if I may.
Yeah.
On one hand, that how we both hesitate using the words, because sometimes I say esotericism, sometimes I say occultism, meaning basically the same thing. I'd rather say esotericism, but then the word esotericism has been so much abused in a very superficial way, being used for everything that is not to me esotericism. That's why I prefer personally occultism, but it has that dark touch to it, which it doesn't have for me. So I'm hesitating with that. But now you will probably see in season 9. I don't know if that episode will open season 9, but that's a typical episode. It will maybe be episode 2 or maybe episode 1 of season 9, where I interview Stefan Harding. I have done that interview already, and he was working with James Lovelock, on the Gaia principle. And so that's very funny because absolutely we somebody sends us some talks here. That's nice. That we have to. Well, why are we separating that? Is occultism not only for the private seller, but it's something we need to do in the open. But exactly that goes in contrary with the word. You're absolutely right. So Stefan Harding, of course, he works for the planet, for the climate, but in a way that uses alchemy. So you see those fields cross, and I think it's important to show that. And also when you do ceremonial magic, if you do it in an order or even solitary, if you do it, for example, with a Golden Dawn background, you will always work for the planet and not for yourself. That's one of the baselines of ceremonial magic in serious groups, right? Right. Yeah.
When you talk to so many people and they're all very passionate about what they're doing and eloquent, and they have all this knowledge, there's a risk, I guess, that it becomes like an intellectual pursuit. You look at it as knowledge in a way. But have you ever come across something during these 5 years, some episode, some person, some teaching that has made you go epiphanic and say, wow, I really need to take this aside and integrate it, and that it changed your life in a way, or added to your life?
Yes. Added would be the right word. Yes, but definitely. Even very recently, to be honest. I mean, well, I'm name dropping now, but why not? But Ian Rees, which was the last interview I did, I hadn't known him, honestly, right? I hadn't known him, and because he just published his first book, even though he's about my age, on Diane Fortune, and he also sent me a manuscript of a second book he will be publishing later this year, and I read that, and I said, hey, that's great. That's about Kabbalah, but to me, it was it made so many things much clearer when I read that manuscript. And I hope it will be the same when other people read it in the fall. But yes, that, for example, added to my understanding. There are many other examples to that, but that's just the most recent that I have in mind. But it does happen, and that's the learning I enjoy most. You learn how to interview, but you learn content, you learn personal approach of things, and that's really great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see we're getting some messages here, and I want to thank the audience. Keep writing, and if you have any questions for Rudolf, well, here comes one.
Yeah.
Let's have a question here from
Sure.
the audience. Do you think that there are other new continuous magic systems like Quarea after Golden Dawn, Thelema,
Schismatas,
by Josephine McCarthy?
Well, Quarea, because you name it, Quarea is to me one of the most interesting of those new schools. I had Josephine also on the show quite some time back already. Quarea is, I think, 4 years old or so, and Quarea is something I even use personally because you just mentioned that Quarea has not changed my life, but it has given me approaches to things in a new way, especially because she talks a lot about being grounded in the place where you are, or also in the time where you are. At the time, I was living in a place where the Swedes, actually, Carl, in the 30 Years' War had fought the Austrians in that very place where I lived, and there were certainly a lot of dead people underneath underneath my house. And actually, my wife and I, we had problems with that. We moved away from it, and Quarea made me aware of what it was. I mean, I'm not joking. This is really something that's really touched my life there. So yes, other schools. Well, there are. Of course, I am personally more informed about those that go into classical ritual and ceremonial magic, as I said, because that's my personal field, or Hermeticism. Well, Franz Barden is not something new, but Emil Steinar, who is a good friend of mine, who I think many people out there know because his books have now been translated finally into English. I wasn't completely stranger to that. He is also somebody who, if you're interested in new things, and even Barden himself is not that very well known out of my close area here. I think there are schools, and schools develop with the time when they are needed. I'm convinced of that. And the golden dawn of the 1880s is not the same as the golden dawn of the 21st century, even though many of the rituals and approaches are similar, but it's like in music. I have to once again take my classical music approach. You have the composer who wrote the work, but you have the interpreter who plays the work and today. So, and in each century, the same music will be performed in a different way. The same is true in magic. We have the same basic structure, the same basic thought, the same basic correspondences, etc. But the way we apply them changes because we, as a human being, are different. Even each individual, of course, but also as an egregore of the 21st century. Let's use that word.
Absolutely. And on that note, maybe we should make it a musical note. And I wonder what kind of music we should listen to now.
Okay. Well, I chose the music. Who wonders? And now the break music is from an opera. I apologize to those who hate opera, but I think there are quite a few who actually like opera music.
Yes.
And I think you're gonna like this. It's from Die Tote Stadt, an opera by an Austrian composer, Erich Wolfgang Kolkart, who wrote, believe that music at age 18. You're gonna be surprised when you hear that. And it's a famous piece. It's the final of that opera, The Dead City. Actually, a very esoteric work in a way. And it's actually from a performance that I created in my former life, 20 years ago. I was the artistic director of the opera house there, where we performed that. And I just love that piece of music, and the way the guy Thorsten Kell is singing that is just amazing. So it's from a live performance, so you'll hear the applause at the end.
Beautiful. Let's listen to it.
Okay. Oops.
Great.
Start again.
Maybe once is enough. Anyway, beautiful piece, and it looked really good. So kudos to you for that.
Thank you.
And I was thinking about if we leave sort of the cold statistics of number of listeners and partakers and talk about feedback. What kind of feedback do you usually get from the episodes?
Well, I get regular feedback. That's the first thing to say. So that's very nice, and I think a very good sign, right? What I'm going to say something horrible now. I don't like Facebook and Twitter at all, right? In general, because I think, well, yes. Let me not say what I think, but I'm highly surprised, really, and I'm not trying to be nice to people. I have, in 5.5 years, hardly had any stupid, I mean, really stupid remarks, or, just the usual Facebook thing. Hardly anything. So the community that is out there on Facebook and Twitter around Thoth Hermes, but probably also around the whole esoteric occult world, they really use those social media in a way to communicate, to be together, and that gives me a lot of very nice feedback actually there. I mean, nice feedback is not only positive feedback. Nice feedback can also be criticism that is helpful, or ideas that you need, or stuff like that. That's nice feedback to me, and there is, yeah, I think about 10 to 20 messages for each episode I would get on different channels, also by email or whatever. So that's work, but that's good.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely good.
Yeah.
But how do you think that the podcast could develop, or do you want to keep the same formula, or do you want to integrate other things? Or
Oh, now you're touching a very interesting question, because, well, I have no idea what to say to that. First of all, it's interesting when I see the 5.5 years, things have changed sometimes. I've tried a few things. For example, I was very surprised the 100th episode I did on video, and this today is the second one on video, right? Um, but that didn't change my audience at all. I had expected there is another extra audience that might be added because people like to see it. No, it had no effect whatsoever, not even on the YouTube channel where the only video version was available. The Ex Libris thing I did, I thought it would be a good idea, but funny enough, people didn't like that format as much as and it was much more work because it was 4 interviews you had to put together and blah blah blah. So I gave that up again. So you see, I try to change things, and I have a few ideas in my mind. I'm honest. Trying this live format here today is one of the trials. I'm not saying this is going to happen in the next months, but I'm trying it out and see how I feel with it, how my audience feels with it. That might be an option. But I'm very careful about developing. I would love to do features. I'd love to do features on certain topics, which is more like a documentary almost, so that maybe adding to the library in a new and interesting way. But I'm very careful, because as long as people like the format as we have here, we have to be careful in adapting it. And I'm also, I mean, people are listening to this here now, and also in the podcast from tomorrow on. Do let me know if you have format ideas that you would like to see, and I'll see what I can do about it.
yeah, one thing that came to mind now is maybe some kind of round table talk on
Yes,
a specific
yes,
theme. To have
absolutely.
more
That
people
was also
involved.
something I have already thought about. Absolutely, and the technical. I mean, I had to learn the technology as well. I feel nowadays much more secure about doing a roundtable than I would have felt 2 years ago, 3 years ago, because it's technically much more complicated, of course. But things I have learned, and the technology has become easier. So, and am I telling you a secret that many of our colleague ecologists are not really tech freaks? It sometimes takes me 15 minutes to make an interview start before we have all set up the way.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. But I think that there's so many different kinds of variations of technological themes or
Yes,
platforms that are basically they carry the same potential. It's just a matter
absolutely,
of learning the one that has the best interface, and
absolutely.
I'm sure there are many. I was thinking, what kind of beneficial, positive aspects do you want the podcast to have for people?
Well, I hope that they discover things. I hope that they find out more in-depth information about the things they already practice or know or have interest in. But especially, and that I think is what I like to I like most when it happens that somebody discovers a new field. And it goes also the other way around. For example, a very recent interview I had on non-dual shamanism. I mean, as I said, shamanism I know quite well because it was at my beginnings. Non-dual shamanism sounds like a contradiction per se. So somebody from the audience suggested that book and that author to me. And I read the book. So again, something that added to my knowledge. Not that I will practice that now because it may be not exactly what I am looking for, but I have had a feedback from quite a few people who said, "Oh, we didn't know that, and we've now started working it." So I think that's one of the aims, that people discover things that, but not only that they use it, but that they just get curious about it, that they find out there's so much out there, and it all goes into our same work. We all work for the same, well, almost all work for the same development of humanity, of the planet, and if we are Bardonists or if we work a serious left-hand path or whatever, if we do it with involvement and we do it with intention, then it's good. And to strengthen that curiosity, that intention, that's one of the aims, I think.
Mm. When you're young, I mean that can go on until when you're grown up too. You're usually a kind of an intuitive amateur in the French sense of the word. You love what you're
Yes.
studying and it inspires you, and then you grow up and you some of us become professionals in the field of relaying information of an esoteric nature in a way, and then you also get swamped with information coming in and it becomes a professional thing. So I'm wondering, for instance, do you have time or energy enough to get all the information that you're offered? I mean, thinking of books from publishers, for instance, who want to pitch good ideas to you for interviews, for instance.
I hope I do. I mean, I spend a lot of time with it, and not because I'm a nerd alone. Maybe I'm also a nerd, but it's just because it interests me. And I mean, I have three grown-up children. They don't need me anymore. They are spread across the world, and my wife is very supporting of what I do here. So that gives me time and leisure also to do it. And yes. I'm not saying I read every book I get. I'm a good cross reader, and when something interests me, then I take it again and read it in depth. But also that 40 years of artistic direction taught me how to cross read and how to develop a sense of finding out what can be interesting and what also, there might be really interesting books and good books, but an interview won't help it because it cannot be transmitted with this media that exists. You have to distinguish between what can be said in a podcast and will work. There might be interesting things that cannot be passed on in that medium. But yeah, I think I spend several hours per day in the field, so to speak, and of course that gives you a broad overview on things.
Mm. You mentioned early on things that you sort of passed through in terms of teachings, like the shamanism and Freemasonry and other things. But I'm curious, if we return to that, how would you define yourself spiritually? Is it easy to answer, or are you as eclectic as the podcast?
I hope I'm not as eclectic as the podcast because that would be That would be difficult, but I'm rather eclectic. Once again, I can say what I found out about myself now here, because we mentioned the music thing earlier. I only found out about 10 years ago or so that my talent for finding, how should I say that? I think I have a talent to discover voices, to work with them in a way that I find the right roles for them, to also discover pieces, and not like I do in the podcast, to find out the little gem that needs to be polished, right? To find what that's a talent I have, and that's a talent which now I know, but I only found out about 10 years ago, has always been there, which I nowadays relate to occultist and magical work. I always was puzzled when I was sitting in a rehearsal and didn't do anything, just watching it and seeing how it went, how tired I was afterwards, how worn out I was, because I passed on so much energy to those people on stage, and that helped it get together. That might sound very weird for some people who are not in that business, but I'm convinced that that's what happened. And I only found out much later that this probably is related to my esoteric occult work, because I create that energy. And of course, the arts and magic, they are related. Both are, to cite Aleister Crowley once again, the arts and the science to change the world with your thinking and with your work. And that's exactly what happens on the stage, for example, when you think a special way. So yeah, I think so. Now I've lost track of what I wanted to say. I was I was in the music so much there, so now I have lost in that.
Yeah, but I think it's they are the same basically. One
Yes,
is slightly more compartmentalized because of our culture and the way our lives are structured.
yes,
So we keep that, our little esoteric interest. But if that can spill over into the whatever we do for sustenance and in work and in social surroundings, it can be really, really powerful. And of course,
absolutely.
vice versa is true too.
But you need also a strong convincing of yourself to do that. When I started the podcast, people might remember that I still had my Facebook page under the name of Nossi Seuton and not Rudolf Berger, because I was just about to get out of the theater world and come into that other field of work that I do now. And I did not at the time, maybe it would be different today, but want people in my artistic world to know that I do an esoteric podcast. I wasn't ready for that. So I have changed, but it's also because that world is still very conservative, as strange as it sounds, right? Yeah.
Well, we have a relevant question here from the audience. CWH writes, what is the importance of the space between exoteric and esoteric world? What is your perspective on balance from your traditions?
The balance between exoteric and esoteric. Well, I think, to me at least, I can only give that answer in a very personal way. Those two worlds are completely interwoven. I wouldn't want to separate them, because what I always hate is that difference that is being made between science or natural science and the spiritual world. And I say spiritual here on purpose, because for me the occult world is included in the spiritual world. And we both fight for the same thing. Science and the time of enlightenment are fighting against a loss of knowledge, against another power that fights against that knowledge, right? And Hermeticism in the 7th century was banned by the church at the time for the same reason, because they had a spiritual knowledge that was opposed to the church at the time. And we fight for freedom of thinking and liberty, both on the exoteric and on the esoteric worlds, and that's why they need to be interwoven for me. I'm convinced that it can only be helped if we do it together, even if you do not believe in the esoteric world, but do not fight against it.
Would you say that the podcast or your work in general has an overarching message or philosophy?
Is that up to me to find out? I don't know. Well, get to know things. Maybe that's what I would say. I mean, even its name, Thoth Hermes. Of course, it's on purpose that I use both those names, the Greek and the Egyptian, because I don't think limiting it to one background is good. I limit it to the Western tradition because I have the impression, I have the feeling that you can't do everything, and I'm much more versed in the Western tradition, and I take it with Rudolf Steiner, who, as I said, was one of my early influences. When I said I have to know my tradition first before I can work in a tradition which is not mine, and that's why I want to know my Western tradition. But if you look through the roster of the episodes, there were also, of course, moments when we went across that border and talked about both sides, if there are both sides, if they're not the same two faces of the same coin, actually.
Scott Derrickson writes, I don't know if I can ask a question here. Yes, you can. But which guest or program had the largest impact on you?
That's a tricky one. I'm 139 will be disappointed. I think I have mentioned her already, Dolores Ashcroft-Nowitzki, because probably she's the doyenne to me. She's you like that style of Edward Butler and her work or not, right? But the way she talks about it, she was 92 when we did the interview. She's still working the same with the same strength as she's now 96, I believe, or 95. But she was 92 when we did the interview. She sounds like a 25-year-old. She was so amazing, and what she told me there, and I mean, she was really impressive. And I think she had, and it was also at an early stage of my work in the podcast. So it was even more impressive at that moment to me, of course. Yeah. Yeah. Can I maybe just quickly reply to 2 or 3 of those questions?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
No, I did not do anything on the langage des oiseaux yet, language of the birds, because somebody, CWH, has asked also that, but it's a good idea, and it is certainly on my list, but I haven't done yet. So Judy Richard, who is a really very nice guy, writing to me often, he gives me a lot of feedback and is a supporter of the show. Thank you, Richard. He asked about to bring on some real Franz Barden expert. You're right, Richard. Have you listened to Ron Clark? I believe he is a real expert on that recently, but he's certainly not going to be the last Franz Barden expert on the show. You're absolutely right. And then the question by Phil about Wouter Hanegraaff. Yes, I have had several academician, now I speak French, academic people on the show. And I have not asked Wouter, you're right, but we had also Karol Kasak recently, we had Chris Judice, we had, help me, Carl, he is from Göteborg, Henrik Bogdan.
Henrik Bogdan, yeah.
Exactly. So we've had, and it's really interesting to have those people because they have it's very interesting how the approach of the academia towards occultism, and Carl is a specialist on that question, has changed over the years. So, yeah, sorry to intervene, but I just thought I should ask those answer those questions.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think if people are interesting, they're interesting, whether they come specifically from an academic point of view or if they're, devout practitioners. And I think this is also an interesting field because it's very much what I call a colorful gray area. Because if you do a bit of detective work, you can find that many of the high-ranking academics have esoteric backgrounds.
Absolutely.
Because why else would
Yeah,
you study it?
exactly. Some of them would admit it, others wouldn't.
Yes.
But it was very funny. But Richard Kaczynski, I believe it was, but he is not one of those. But we were discussing the question, right? And he said something very funny. Would you not want a Catholic priest to study theology? So why would you not, the practicing occultist, have studied the occult academia? So yes, I'm absolutely with him on that. But well, I think Walter Hanegraaff would have something to say about that, and his opinion on that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm thinking if we just toy with the idea that magic works, right?
Yes, let's do that.
And that means that we can upheave space, we can upheave time, we can travel freely and unhampered. You, as being a podcast producer and a researcher, and you're looking for gnosis, if all these things could be upheaved and you could travel in time and space, who would be your absolute dream guest for the podcast?
Ooh, only one?
Only one, Rudolf.
Only one. Oh my
No,
God.
sorry. Let's make it 3 then.
Okay, thank you. And again, you might be surprised because there might be 3 different approaches. Now, I wasn't prepared for that question. I wasn't prepared for any of those questions. People might think that we prepared this podcast, but I said to Carl, "Do you need any information before?" And no. And I said, "Okay, I shut up now. He'll gonna do that like that." So I've not been prepared to that question. Well, Aleister Crowley would be one of them, certainly, because I'm personally, people know that a bit skeptical about him, right? But I would love to interview him because I would like to find out myself if I'm right or if I'm wrong. And I would probably be wrong. And on the other hand, in the same time field, I think Mathers would be somebody I'd like to talk to, because of course the origin of the Golden Dawn and the very also doubtful parts of the origin of the Golden Dawn and what happened afterwards, when he left for Paris and Florence Farr took over. So that's a fascinating story I'd like to know more about firsthand. Right. Also for the audience, I think would be interesting. And John Dee, funny enough.
Yeah.
John Dee would certainly be not in order, but the third person if I have only 3 choices.
Right. And I think for Dee specifically, it would be very weird to be on a podcast. He can't relate. Crowley could relate to radio and TV, no, radio and movies. Yeah. So, you've produced a lot of stuff. 5 years have passed and more, and you say that the list is still it's not inexhaustible. There are still people to talk to.
Oh yeah.
What happens now, though? Like in the immediate future, there's a new season coming up, right?
There's a new season coming up. Yes. Well, it's building. It's not. I mean, I said Stefan Harding is going to be on the show. That's for sure already. We just get a message in about. Yes, thank you. You were also mentioning Joe Vegas to me at some point. Joe Vegas, I wanted to do an interview in July, but the book is not ready to come out yet. So, and publishers don't like when you talk about the book 3 months before it's printed. So Joe is definitely coming in this. Joe Vegas is coming in this coming season, but I can't tell you exactly when. Helen van Arts is coming with her new book also very soon. So somebody who is writing under the name Steve D. He is not called D, but that's a pseudonym. It's not John D. I'm interviewing, but Steve D. About Zen and the Western esoteric tradition. That's an interesting one. So just a few names to. I don't want to give away too much, Carl, but that's the immediate next ones. But Joe maybe still in November or December, but and I believe Carl Abrahamsson is back in February, if I'm not wrong. That's when his new book is due.
Anytime.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but I have you on the list. I have a little list here actually of books that I always have that list with me here. Oops, just very briefly. And most of the people on that list and with the dates of the new books are planned for the near future.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Rudolf. Is there anything that you would like to add in this very, very special episode?
Oh, even that question was not planned. No, really. I mean, I said that already earlier, but maybe you can never say that enough. I think it's really. I'm very happy that I made that decision 5 or now 7.5 years back, because it took me some time, as I said, to realize it, that I took the decision to make that happen. And people who have followed the show throughout, they realize also at some point I had about an 8 months or so break in between. When you do things like that, I don't know about you, Carl, you're a podcaster and publisher yourself. Sometimes you have doubtful moments, and say, is it worth it? And there's a question coming in now that exactly goes to that point. If you give me the moment to answer that
Absolutely.
question.
It came from the astral plane.
Exactly, and I know who I know the initials, and she's really writing from the astral planes, yeah. And we get a message saying your recent amalgamation and the creation of Kaikobad Radio was so rich and varied. Can you speak about the future of it and the practicalities of maintaining it? Carl, you are also part of that content of that project. I don't know how many of the listeners here have actually realized that Kaikobad Radio existed, and that might even be one of the problems. Kaikobad Radio, I started it about 4 months ago, I believe, and it's a 24/7. It was a 24/7 internet radio with content from, again, 25 different content providers like Carl Abrahamsson, like Glitchbottle, for example, Occult of Personality, the Theosophical Society in America, just to name a few, 25 providers of content. A golden cauldron, as our guest here says. And the problem is it's work, it's time, it's money. That's fine as long as the result works, right? But and you have only 40 or 50 people a week, then the 3 hours you pass every week is becoming a bit too much, and also the money you put into it. So what would be needed? I think it would be needed to. I'm not good. Well, I'm not really good at social media publicity because I don't like to do it. That's the whole thing. I like producing content on the podcast, on the radio. I like selecting topics and doing things. I can pass hours on that. I hate writing a message on Facebook and say, hey, look, we are doing an interview next week. I just don't like it. So if anybody listens out there and says, hey, I'll do that for you, I might consider to bring Kaikobad Radio, who stopped yesterday actually, to bring Kaikobad Radio on again. And maybe this is also the occasion to thank one person, because my friend Ursula here from Salzburg, Austria, she has been writing the newsletters and the web page articles on the show notes for the last 2 years for me. And that's an enormous amount of work she took off me. And I want to thank her also, really, because it's a lot of work, and it makes it so much easier for me. But something like that would be needed to revive Kaikobad Radio. Somebody who would do the social media work. I think that's the word to use. Correct me if I'm wrong, Carl, but I think
No, I think absolutely that's the correct one. And you know, for what it's worth, it's just a necessary part of the beast that is online culture.
Absolutely.
And I hope you find a good person who can bring Kaikobad Radio back. That would be very, very nice. But I certainly understand your your feelings towards it, because
Yeah,
there's a limit to all kinds of altruism, and I
absolutely,
think you
absolutely.
reached one, but
And I want
maybe
to
it'll come
keep
back.
Thoth Hermes at the level it is, and not
Yeah.
drop in quality because I do another thing. So Thoth Hermes is my main focus, and that's where I put the quality and energy first. And I also need to read those books, as you said, right? I need to read those books, research who will I bring on. That takes time. It's not just doing the interviews.
Absolutely. Well, I think we could sum up by saying you've done a great
Sure.
job, and it's very inspiring to take part of like old episodes. There's still so many that I haven't listened to yet, so it's a treasure trove, and I think you're doing the right thing. Just keep up the good work, and produce new episodes, and then what happens with Kaikobad will show itself. I think
Exactly.
these things can become little beasts, and when it's no fun anymore, then it's time to reconsider. But I think you're having great fun with Thoth Hermes, the podcast.
Oh,
So
absolutely. And
yeah,
Kaikobad is not dead, it's just sleeping.
this sleeping exactly, exactly. It's in hibernation.
Exactly.
So, and I think perhaps it's suitable if we end with a beautiful piece of music, the
Yes.
old Bob Dylan song, Make You Feel My Love. And in this version, it's a young singer called Emily Linge. Thank you to the audience. Thank you, Rudolf. And we'll see you again soon.
Thank you. Thank you, Carl, for having me. Okay, and that's where the podcast ends. And Emily Linge can only be heard in the podcast starting tomorrow. But we needed to do that and now cut the sound and here. Okay, well, thanks to everyone who was out there, right? It was great.
Thank you. Yeah. Thanks to
Yeah,
the
yeah,
audience. Yeah.
great. And thank you, Carl.
And thank you, Rudolf. We're so polite.
Absolutely.